So you've seen this many times in the sim, but this is actually the real thing. This is the real Wacky Wabbit, and we're about to go up in it.
Okay, hang on a minute, what's going on here? You're thinking, yeah, you told us that we were going up in the real Wacky Wabbit. Well, we will be, trust me, we will be. I just wanted to quickly show you this, really just to give some context as to where this is about. If you've not been to this channel before, it's really about flying in the simulator, and predominantly warbirds. That's my thing. The great thing about flight sims is that you can fly anything you want. Some people choose to fly the big airliners. I like to fly warbirds, and I also like to fly, chuck in a bit of GA as well. Predominantly the Bonanza V35B, the VTOL. Anyway, that aside, what we have here is the A2A Simulations Accu-sim T6 Texan. This is a T6G. And this gives you an idea of the cockpit. So we've got some pretty standard controls. All of these, I'm showing you all this really because it will put it into context when Andy shows us the real thing. This is different to Andy's, but it's similar enough that it feels very familiar. When I got into the aircraft, I felt very much at home. Because everything seemed very familiar, although it was slightly different. The other thing that we've got in this cockpit here is the GTN 650. This is actually an add-on from Flight 1. A2A do provide this with a GPS, but this is an add-on that I've just stuck into it. Why do I fly this? The beauty of these A2A aircraft is that they are very realistic. A2A produce simulators for the military, the American military, the government, commercial organisations, and luckily for us guys, they also make stuff for normal civvies and people at home who like to fly simulators. But the quality is there, so you have an aircraft where everything is modelled down to the viscosity of the oil, and also it's persistent. So if I was to be an idiot now and chuck this about and cause some damage to any part of it, then I would that damage would be there next time I come to fly it. So you have to look after them. That's the other thing that makes it quite rewarding. So I came about, or how did I come about flying in the real Wacky Wabbit? So Andy Goodall, who is the owner of Wacky Wabbit, had made a comment on a post that I'd put on Instagram, where I'd flown the T6 with another paint on it, and he suggested, or he joked, that I should be flying his, and I thought, well, why not? It's UK based, it's at Duxford a lot, why not? So I went onto the A2A Simulations forum and found an old post with this repaint on it, and couldn't find anywhere to actually download it. And big thanks to Lewis Bloomfield of A2A, he got in touch with a chap called Martin Pengelly, and Martin along with Matt Wynn are responsible for putting this repaint together, and also Martin has a connection to the real Wacky Wabbit, which we'll come on to. That's one thing that you get with the simulator. Unfortunately, they have a tendency to freeze for a couple of seconds, which is a bit unnerving. Yeah, got in touch with them, and Martin very kindly allowed me to use this repaint, and I made a video, and everything kind of went from there. One of the fantastic things about the community is that there are people like Martin and Matt who make repaints of real aircraft, so that guys like me can fly a representation of the real aircraft in the simulator, and that is just absolutely fantastic. So if we take a look outside, So what we have is a very accurate representation of Wacky Wabbit. Now there are some subtle differences. This is a T6 Texan. It's not a Harvard. So for example, we don't have the extended exhaust pipe on the side. This aircraft also has the doors on the undercarriage, which actually Wacky Wabbit would have if it wasn't for the fact that unfortunately, as it's a T6J, it doesn't have the the fittings to enable the doors to be on there. But apart from that, it's pretty much the same aircraft, and I just think Matt and Martin did a fantastic job of bringing this aircraft to life and putting it in the sim for sim geeks like me to fly around. Anyway, I promised you the real thing, so let's get on to it.
And here we are back in reality, and doesn't she look purposeful? Wacky Wabbit being refueled now, getting ready to go up. But before we do that, let's have Andy talk us through the controls and the instruments in the front cockpit, and we can see how that compares to what we're used to seeing in the simulator.
So airspeed indicator here, that's in miles an hour. This is what we use, everything we use on the Rabbit is in miles an hour, the hour scale. The direction indicator there, obviously there's the E2 compass there, so we have to set this, whatever, and unlock it. It does wander quite a bit, so we're constantly cross-referencing those two there.
Yeah.
The artificial horizon doesn't work in this, but we're strictly VFR. We never really go into or above cloud, to be honest, and so that doesn't function on this. Manifold pressure is reading barometric at the moment, 30, but this is our power instrument along with the RPM. So for takeoff, first takeoff of the day is full power, and then after that we're generally looking at about 34 inches at about 2000 RPM.
Okay.
Just for noise abatement really, because we're at Duxford and we don't want to annoy the locals.
Yeah.
But you can go to 36 inches and 250 for 5 minutes, I believe. It's placarded somewhere. But we're rarely up at those sort of limits, to be honest. And for aerobatics, we use 30 inches and 2000 RPM. So if you're super precise, you'd say 29 inches and 1900 RPM, but you can never get those flickering needles to actually be so precise. Yes, I use 30 and 2000 RPM. The vertical speed indicator, the up and downy bit there, is pretty standard on all aeroplanes. To fly these aeroplanes well, obviously you want to remain in balance, so there's your turn and slip there. Altimeter is pretty standard. Stopwatch we use all the time. I use that for everything. I use it for displays, if I'm transiting somewhere. It's a very useful bit of kit, especially on a display where you have got a very limited time slot, and if someone says you've got 8 minutes from running in, you've got 8 minutes, so it really is. So we flip the old stopwatch on, and very useful. I use it for many things. I won't talk about it now, but very useful bit of kit. And it's better there than on your watch. You see all these posh Breitlands and stuff that you can't actually operate in an aeroplane, but that is perfect.
Right in front of you, isn't it?
Yeah. The hydraulic pressure there, so that's obviously for hydraulic pressure. You need that for your gear, you need it for the flaps, and it stays at 0 actually until you select a service. When you select a service like flaps down, that will then provide the pressure up to about in the green around about 1,000 pounds, and then after a couple of minutes that pressure will go down, suction, mags, and then your fuel quantity left, fuel quantity right. G meter, as we proved today, maximum I pull in this is 3.5 G. We did that today. We did a nice loop at about 3 G, and I kind of keep it down there really. And then your combination gauge here with your temperatures and pressures. So temperature there, oil pressure. Harvard, the main temperature I'm looking there is 40 degrees. We don't take off unless we've got 40 degrees and in the green. And then fuel pressure, very low fuel pressure, and oil pressure in the green there. Cylinder head temperature, very important instrument. We can't take off unless we've got 120 degrees on there. We've got a maximum as well. Carb air, I use that. I look at that quite a lot, especially on takeoff and landing, when I'm applying sort of carb heat, and you know, I like to see it around 50 degrees or so. Moving down here, got the landing lights. I don't want to burn the landing lights out, they're very expensive, and they certainly don't go on the ground, only in the air, and I flick these on for displays. That's pretty much the only time I use them.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, because I think I've seen videos on your YouTube channel where you've got those on and you're doing a loop.
Yeah.
So that's just really for when you're doing that.
Yeah, so with the lights on and the smoke on, it's a great visual. So we save those.
Yeah.
Undercarriage lights there, so when the battery's on, to the battery now, that's 2 greens, gear down, and also the 2 soldiers are down as well, and the flap soldiers up, so flaps are up, gears down. So as the gear goes up, the soldiers go up. As the flaps go down, the soldier goes down. So you know, that's a very important panel, obviously. It is, you've noticed anyway, gear down 2 green, soldiers down, and then I look on the wings left, I look on the wings right to make sure that the pegs on the top of the undercarriage legs are in.
Okay.
This is also, I use this quite a lot as well on a cold day. Push to open, oil radiator shutter, so I pull it out, and that just helps me get the oil temperature a lot faster on a cold day, like it did today. It's a bit more chilly than I thought it was going to be. Yeah, so we use that just to get the oil temperature up. Your normal key gas primer there, as you saw, 5 strokes normally for a cold start. On the left, nav lights P2 and genuine battery go on for start. Obviously use a P2 when required on nav lights. This is the new edition. So here we've got smoke, arm, and then if all the electrics are on, that will be smoke on, and you have a red light there to show you that it's in operation. So that's the latest addition to the Rabbit. Yeah, standard radio, trig radio, and trig transponder, and then we've got the Hobbs meter. So this Hobbs meter is a new addition as well. So this is based on airtime. So as soon as there's air going into the pitot, this starts clicking over in hours and tenths. So that's 8 hours and 6 tenths, which is 36 minutes. Okay. And the thing is, because this costs, including that, £600 an hour, every time that clicks over 1/10, that's 60 quid plus fuel. Yeah. Plus fuel. Yeah. And when you're burning, you know, 30-40 gallons an hour, you know, in doing aerobatics, that's
you're watching that.
That clock there is your cost clock.
Yeah.
What I like about this Harvard is it's got a spade grip.
Yeah. I was expecting a stick, but only because I've seen pictures of them with sticks, so that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know whether this is just a Canadian thing or not. For Commonwealth pilots, you know, transitioning to, you know, British fighters with spade sticks, I'm not sure, but it's nice. You know, you can do a 2-handed pull on it if you wish. You know, you get a nice even pull, but it's just nice for moving around. Quite like that. And if I kick that off there, that's just the control lock. So when I shut the aircraft down, the first thing I do is hit the master switch, you know, just make sure the master switch is off, the mags are off, and then I reach down and control lock in.
Okay.
On other airplanes, that I also do fuel, but we'll leave the fuel on all the time in this aircraft. But yeah, master switch, make sure it's off, mags are off, control lock in, and fuel if required.
And you leave the fuel on all the time because?
Just in case really, the pilot gets in and taxis off inadvertently with the fuel off, and has enough fuel just to get to the end of the runway.
And then you don't do it.
Yeah. But
that's interesting.
Yeah, but it doesn't leak fuel. You know, fuel doesn't go anywhere. And it's got a safety mechanism that we use as well. Rudder pedals here, fully adjustable. So if you've got long legs, you can just flick that out there and push the rudder pedal down to wherever you want it really, and it locks in various positions. But for me, being a shorty, I just flick it out. So my check is based both out, and that's good for me.
And that's quite an easy adjustment, isn't it?
Yeah, it's super easy all with your feet. Just like with the cabin there as well, you do it with your feet. Yeah. So you can adjust those with your feet, and then to start it, you energise the gauge it. Once it's hummed for about a minute or just under a minute, you then just go forward and that engages the propeller. 1, 2, 3, 4, mags on.
Get that lovely sound.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a one-on paper anchor trick, you know, you're holding the stick and the throttle and you're using your foot, but works very well. I don't know whether you can see on the left-hand side here.
I can get it in a bit. Okay.
There, so we've got the throttle, and the mixture is lean, and then this is mixture rich. Okay, so mixture lean. In the other Harvard we had mixture lean that way, mixture rich that way.
That's what I was expecting.
Yeah. So the idea with this, he used to have a mechanism on, so when he pulled, no matter where the mixture was, when he pulled the throttle back, it caught with the mechanism and brought that back to rich.
Okay.
Generally, I guess for the student pilot, and you had another mechanism where you could release it.
Yeah.
So that's mixture lean on this aeroplane. So when you've got two Harvards, one lean that way and one rich that way, you've got to be very careful.
You've got to remember,
Yeah, so there you go. The prop is in full decrease. So for takeoff, prop full increase. And if we put it there, that's about 2,000 RPM.
Yeah.
So if you a bit of noise abatement, that gives you 2,000. That gives you 250. And you've got your throttle, your friction nut there. Carbite again. You can do that with your foot if you wanted.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you don't have to reach down. So that's the carbite now on cold, and then move it to hot there.
And was it actually designed that way so that you could use it with your foot?
Yeah. I've spoken to all sorts of
Makes sense.
pilots from the 50s and stuff that flew these, and that's where I get all this information from, really. Speaking to the guys that went through the training system on it.
Yeah.
Hydraulic pump is here. So for example, if you lost hydraulic power, you can use your hydraulic pump, and you can pump your flaps down, pump your gear down. With this, it's got a little extended knob on it there. Mm-hmm. This is the gear retraction handle there, and even in the 1950s, you know, they did look at the ergonomics behind it, and that's actually shaped like a wheel.
Oh yeah.
So in the dark, if you feel down, that's a wheel, because here is the flap.
Yeah.
The flap is shaped like
a flap.
A flap. So you can go, that's definitely a flap, and that's definitely a wheel.
Very clever.
Okay. So gear, we don't pull this up on the ground because the gear will come up on the ground.
Yeah.
Because it's old technology. So I always tell people, don't touch that. Leave that alone. And then the flap there, it's got various positions. So with the flap, I can actually, in flight, I can set the flap. I can put the flap down until, say, I've got 20 degrees, and then I go to the middle indent, and that will lock it at 20.
Okay.
I can give it 30, stop.
Right.
Or 45, just leave it there.
Yeah.
So I can give it like 5 degrees, lock. Yeah.
Okay.
Or whatever. Yeah. So that's how that works there. And then there's different fuel gauges on Harvards. Some have a reserve, this hasn't, so it's just left, right and off. And a South African one, one I fly in Turkey, that is fuel off and fuel on.
Okay.
Not left and right.
Just
is
or isn't.
Is or isn't. and that's probably one of the safest ones out there.
Yeah.
But the ones with the reserve can get quite dangerous, because you get, if you're on the left tank, you can get down to where you need to put your reserve on, and you've got 16 gallons left at that point there. But some people have come in to land on the left tank when they were literally just about to hit the top of the standpipe. So really, you know, as a safety point on those, the right tank I use, and the reserve tank. I never use the left tank. Okay. Because you can easily run out of fuel on landing. Yeah. That'll be the worst time. If there's fine, you just flick to reserve. But I just use right and reserve. So there are little idiosyncrasies with all these Harvards, and if you look at a Mark 2B Harvard, the gear and flap arrangement is completely different again. Okay. A lot less ergonomic, I would say, and this is the improvement. Yeah. Big separation between the two. Totally different levers. Yeah. Can't get it confused. Works better for me. Yeah. Even in some of the older Harvards, they haven't got the manifold pressure. They've got boost.
Oh yes, yeah, yeah.
Like in the Spitfire.
That's
so
right.
So in some Harvards now that'll be reading 0 boost.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. That's interesting.
So yeah, that's it really. The steam doesn't go forward and backwards; it only goes up and down. And that's the Wacky Wabbit.
Perfect.
That's all there is to it.
So by now I would imagine you're probably pretty sick of looking at my face, so let's have a look at the history of Golf Bravo Juliet Sierra Tango, or Wacky Wabbit as we know and love her. So she was built in 1953 by the Canadian Car and Foundry Company as a model T6J. She was built for the USAF under the Mutual Development Assistance Program. This was really designed to strengthen NATO post Second World War, and so she was sent to Italy as part of a contract where she was used to train new pilots for the Italian Air Force, and also eventually for instructors, to train up new instructors. So she was in pretty good hands. And do you know what? I love the Italian language, I really do. I can't speak it, but I love it. So I'm not going to try and pronounce the destination, the organisation that we're using it, because I respect the language too much. But it's beautiful. But anyway, that's where she was. So she was in Italy, and she was in Italy for a long time. She actually eventually came to UK shores again in 1981, where she went to Gloucester, and this is where she truly became Golf Bravo Juliet Sierra Tango. Now, in that same year, 1981, she was painted up as A0 for the film Empire of the Sun. They did a cracking job painting her, but also just to try and make it look more authentic, they did some modifications to the canopy. So if you've seen that film, if you're going to see that film, worth just checking that out. She's only a film star. It's incredible. Anyway, after that, she's changed hands a few times again, and now in 2005, she's painted it up as a Kilo Foxtrot 729. Royal Air Force markings, and actually the aircraft that His Royal Highness Prince Philip flew during his advanced training, and certainly recently, maybe especially if you're in the UK, you'll have seen those photographs of Prince Philip soloing and flying over Windsor Castle. So that's what our aircraft here actually looked like during that time. And even also bore the 5 stars denoting his rank of Marshal of the Royal Air Force. And then she's changed hands a few times, with eventually coming to Duxford in 2013, operated by T6 Harvard Aviation Ltd. But now, 2020, she's sold in its entirety to Andy Goodall, and she becomes under T6 Harvard Ltd. So that's a little potted history of Wacky Wabbit. It is well worth, I should say at this point, checking out the website. Now, I'm trying to just give you some of the background to Wacky Wabbit, but there is a fantastic website up, t6harvard.com, well worth a look. Everything you could ever want to know about the Harvard and the T6, and also history of Wacky Wabbit. Some fantastic documents on there, pilot's notes. It really is a treasure trove, and if you have any interest at all in the Harvard, actually any interest in warbirds, it's a really interesting place to go. And also if you want to get hold of the repaint for the A2A Texan, that's on there as well, on an A2A Simulations page. Right, we've talked about the history of the aircraft. What about the name Wacky Wabbit? Where did that come from? Where did the livery come from? So the decision to make the Wacky Wabbit was taken in 2014 when Andy suggested to the group that it would be a good thing to paint the aircraft as a former Desert Air Force Mark II Harvard, really to honour the Desert Air Force. And also to find an aircraft that had some sort of a Duxford connection. And then of course the big question, who is going to pay for it? So they went out, sought a sponsor, and RS Paintworks that are based at the now E-Shot airfield came up with a deal, and so the plan was set. So the next thing was to find an aircraft to base it on, and the livery was meticulously researched, and Martin Pengelly, we've heard that name before, was involved in putting this together. Now it's worth noting that Martin, who worked on the repaint, also worked on the original paint for the aircraft, so it's quite something. Again, we have a connection there between the virtual aircraft and the real aircraft. So Martin had a look around and found AJ841, which was a flying with a squadron formerly at Falmere, which is just up the road from Duxford, and that had eventually ended up over in the Middle East. And with the help of Shane Clayton in Canada, the current livery that we know was put together. And there was really a key thing was to make it authentic. So even the canopy was changed from a Harvard 4 to the Harvard 2. Now the original AJ841 would have been used out in the Middle East, Palestine, Egypt, Syria, that region, to train pilots much in the same way as anywhere else. And there's something quite nice about the fact that the Desert Air Force are represented. The Desert Air Force was heavily engaged in ground support over there in the Middle East, and it's nice that they're represented here in the UK today as a fitting tribute to them in an aircraft that not only displays in the UK but also trains new pilots. So she's never stopped training new pilots. So before we talk more about the name and the logo, let's see that take off again, this time from the point of view of the pilot. And it's worth noting here that the camera in the front does not pick up audio. Now this leads us on to the name and the logo. We'll start with the logo. This was something that actually Andy found on a patch that was on sale on eBay, and it was a patch that it turned out was used by number 5 British Flying Training School, actually based over in the US. At the time, there was a move to train pilots outside of the conflict zones. Obviously, in the UK, it was getting attacked by the Luftwaffe. So it was felt that the best thing to do is move trainee pilots away somewhere safer. They can concentrate on their training and not have to worry about getting an ME-109 up the chuff just as they are trying to learn how to land. That's never a good idea. So that's where that patch actually comes from. And what Andy has done is adapted it by changing the yellow Harvard that features on the patch to the desert camouflage that we see on Wacky Wabbit. Also, originally the name was planned to be Wicked Wabbit, or that was one of the names that Andy quite liked. Unfortunately, this is already in use by a P-47, so in the end she became Wacky Wabbit. And actually it's a name that has struck with people. Kids and adults alike love it, and it seems very fitting for such a perky, capable, playful aircraft as she is. Now, don't forget, there is a lot more information than I've given you on the website, so please do take a look. It's well worth it. You won't be disappointed, and you'll learn a heck of a lot more than I can give you at this time. Now it's time for me to shut up and time for you to enjoy the sound of that fantastic Wasp radial engine. So, what did I take away from it as a sim pilot compared to the real thing? First of all, and this is the most obvious thing, is the lack of physical feedback when you're in the simulator. Obviously, in the real thing, you would be getting physical feedback from the controls. Unfortunately, the stick wasn't fitted in the back for this, so I couldn't say how the controls actually felt. But what I can tell you is that obviously the G, actually feeling the G, gives you a much better appreciation for flying it smoothly. And in fact, one of the things that I've taken away from this is that I'll be keeping an eye on the G meter a lot more than I probably have done in the past, because you haven't got that physical feedback. That's kind of what you're going to have to use for that. Makes for much smoother aerobatics, for example, I think. Also, it reinforced keeping a good power setting for aerobatics and not messing about with the throttle. It's something I've tried to do since I had some great feedback from people in the past, especially Rob Wilkinson, who's also an ex-Harvard pilot. Just setting a power setting for aerobatics and leaving it there and not messing it about. Also, smoother flying. I think it's very interesting to watch a real pilot at work and see just how smoothly they're doing those aerobatics. Again, that's linked in with being careful how many G's you're pulling, but especially with warbird aerobatics, it's not about kicking it about, it's about displaying it with grace. And certainly Andy did that, and that's something that I plan to emulate as I continue to practice with my aerobatics. Wow. Approaching, this was an interesting one. In the Spitfire, I tend to do a very tight curved approach. In the Harvard, I've tended to do a further out, more straight in approach, but watching the way Andy did it, he actually came in perhaps a little bit higher than I've been doing, and not quite so long approach. And it was actually beautiful to watch because he brought it in. It wasn't a long approach, and there also wasn't a long float. I guess perhaps with the Harvard in the sim, I tend to float it a bit longer than I should, and watching him just bring it down and just kiss it down into a 3-point landing was just absolutely fantastic. And again, something to emulate and practice in the sim. The sounds were spot on. The sounds between the A2A sim and the Harvard, even down to the sound of the primer, absolutely fantastic. And it sounds like a small thing, but one of the things that you want in the sim is that immersion. The whole point of the immersion is to make it feel as real as possible, so that it really gets your head inside the cockpit. So when you're concentrating on the more important things like power settings and actually flying the aircraft, it's the little details like the sound that make it feel that much more realistic. And also the thing that struck me was, even though I was kind of expecting it, is just how roomy the T6 is inside. It's a very comfortable cockpit, lots of room, gets quite warm, but it's a lovely cockpit, and as I say, plenty of room. So I think the overall thing that I took away from it is A2A have done an absolutely fantastic job bringing this aircraft to the simulator. There was so much about it that was felt familiar, felt like I'd been there before, and the way the aircraft behaved, the way the instruments behaved, little things like when the aircraft started, the oil pressure was quite high and then started to come down as the oil starts to warm up a bit. It's little details like that that are simulated in the A2A aircraft that when you actually see it in the real thing, it gives you a little bit of a grin and makes you think, wow, okay, this sim that we're flying is actually really spot on. And that's always a good thing. That's what we're trying to do. Trying to find aircraft that are realistic and to try and fly them as best as we can. So let's now talk a bit more to Andy and find out a bit more about him. So what was it that made an elite paratrooper who jumps out of aeroplanes decide to start flying them?
Yeah, good question. Well, I was on the Red Devils parachute team, and we had our own aeroplane. We had a twin Islander.
Yeah.
And after a couple of years of jumping, I thought it'd be a good idea to fly the Islander. So I went and got my private license, and it went from there, really.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And then from there, you decided to get into warbirds.
Not quite. Yeah. So I became a parachute pilot. You know, so I flew the Caravan, Islander, Otters, and that kind of stuff. And,
Yeah.
I did that for about 10 years. And yeah, just going up and down 20 times a day gets a bit boring. So I quite fancied aerobatics, and then, you know, I thought I'd like to fly a warbird.
Yeah.
And the easiest way to get into warbirds is have a ton of hours on a Harvard. And I ended up getting into a share in a Harvard.
Okay.
And eventually I got into this Harvard, and now two of us own this aeroplane.
Fantastic.
And we fly it, display it, train people in it, and experience flights in it.
And what was your training path into the Harvard, or did you literally just jump straight? You did your tail wheel training?
I jumped straight in and struggled like hell. So I started on an Oster because I had no tail time, so I bought a little D4 Oster, and I did a bit of cub time. And the main aircraft that helped me with this was the Chipmunk.
Okay.
So I did about 10 hours Chipmunk.
Yeah.
Because I literally got in this and I struggled a little bit initially because I had about 1,200 hours on nose draggers and 0 time on tail draggers. So with about 60 hours on Osters and stuff like that,
Yeah.
I started getting the concept of what it's like to land on your wheels and what it's like to land in a 3-point attitude.
Yeah, yeah.
All those things you don't get in, say, a Caravan, which is, you know, it's such an easy airplane to fly and land.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. So really, I then started training from the back and then transitioned to the front.
Right.
It took about 12 hours to go solo.
And what was that like, flying from the back with the limited visibility? How did you keep your kind of situational awareness, not be able to see straight through the front?
Well, initially in the training, you only do about 1 or 2 hours in the back, and then
Yeah.
straight to the front.
Okay.
Because if we're going to train pilots, we want them in the front.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really until I got 100 or so hours in the Harvard as a pilot, I went back to the back to see what it's like to fly from the back.
Okay.
So then, you know, by that time, I knew the airplane inside out.
Yeah.
I found it challenging, and I wanted to be good enough to train people myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm quite comfortable in the back.
Okay.
Totally comfortable.
Yeah.
It's challenging. It's nice. But it's not too difficult. It actually brings a smile to my face actually flying from the back.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, it's another dimension.
Yeah, it's something different. And how did you find it jumping out of aeroplanes? That's the
Jumping
big...
out of aeroplanes.
Yeah.
Well, I've been doing it all my life.
You obviously
really.
enjoyed it.
Well, yeah, I did my first parachute jump in 1987.
Right.
And I enjoyed it so much, I joined the army.
Yeah.
And then obviously I did the military parachuting and everything like that.
Yeah.
And then 10 years after being in the parachute regiment, I then went to the Red Devils and continued. Probably got about 6,000, 7,000 jumps.
That's a heck of a lot, yeah.
Well, yeah, but you know,
Wow.
I'm getting old now, you know, so it's just a lifetime of jumping, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, tandem rating, accelerated free fall rating, and you know, all these qualifications, and then you know, before you know, you've got 6,000 or 7,000 jumps, you know.
Yeah, fantastic.
But I haven't jumped for about a year, so I think I'll be quite nervous when I jump again because of this COVID. So
Yeah. No, I can't even begin to imagine it. Great stuff. So there you have it. What a day, what an experience. I can heartily recommend it to anybody who is flying warbirds in the simulator. The opportunity here with the Harvard is not as expensive as you might think. Head over to the website T6Harvard.com and you can see what the latest prices are, but it's a great way of getting that insight into how the real thing flies and what the experience of that G-force and the sights and the smells and all those kind of things that we don't necessarily get in the sim. It just helps to colour that experience when you're actually in the simulator. It helps to even though you haven't got it right then, the memory of having it gives you that extra touch into reality. This probably makes no sense to you, but if you've done it, it would make absolute sense to you, I promise you. So as I say, don't forget, check out t6harvard.com and also have a look at a Facebook group. I'm going to put links to these down below, but there's a Facebook group which is actually run by Andy and some others, including Martin, and it's T6 Harvard, Yale and SNG, the pilot maker. Martin Pengelly, I've mentioned him a couple of times now. He's responsible for researching the repaint of the real Wacky Wabbit, and also involved in the repaint with Matt Wynn of the Sim Wacky Wabbit. Martin is something of an expert on the T6. He's got a lot of experience in the T6. He knows an awful lot about the history of the T6 and what aircraft there are currently around the world. And this Facebook group, again, is absolutely fascinating. Lots of images on there, lots of history, huge treasure trove of information. Can't recommend it enough. Go take a look, have a look at the link below, and give them a visit. So all I can say now is a massive thank you to Andy. I do really appreciate the opportunity to fly up in the real Wacky Wabbit. It was a great day, and I look forward to flying Wacky Wabbit in the simulator for many hours to come. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you found it interesting. Maybe seeing the real thing inspired you. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the channel again soon.